After Game of Thrones' last few seasons, I was ready to be completely done with the world of Westeros on screen. I knew House of the Dragon was being made by different creators. This wasn't Dumb and Dumber, and we're probably going to be past the days of writers kind of forgetting that their show is set in a medieval-inspired world and not a sandbox filled with action figures. But with the increasing lack of interest in good narrative TV these days, I had very low hopes, and I wasn't even sure if I was going to watch it. But as the House of Dragon started airing and reviews started coming in, my interest was genuinely piqued. I liked what I was hearing. So now I'm up to date and there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. I really have to admire what House of the Dragon is doing here. The storytelling style is extremely ambitious and something I've rarely seen on TV or anywhere really. While Game of Thrones covered a few years in a span of 8 seasons, House of the Dragon is 6 episodes in and has already covered 15 years of history. Every episode split so far, except from episode 4 to 5, has a major time leap of several months to years. Now, I'm not fully informed on the dance. It's not like I'm trying to avoid spoilers completely, but I do like the fact that I don't always know what's going to happen before it happens. What I do know is that the characters that we're following at the start of this story are not the same ones that we're going to be following at the end. This is a tale that spans multiple generations. It feels like an old-school, grand historical Hollywood epic, along the lines of Spartacus, The Ten Commandments, Barry Lyndon, The Last Emperor, Gone with the Wind, or the 2 Godfather movies. And it almost works. For the most part, the time jumps are handled with beautiful finesse. A few offhand comments which insinuate how much time has passed since the last episode, and lots of subtle writing ploys and character moments that make any missing character growth and changes in circumstance from the previous episode clear, make the show feel almost seamless as it jumps long periods of time. Episode 2, for example, leaves off with Corlys joining Daemon to start a war in the Stepstones against the King's orders, and Episode 3 shows that time jump simply by having the progress of the war brought up at the meeting and establishing Viserys' intent to ignore it. Clear changes of stakes, added very clearly with just a few lines. The show overall does a great job at world building and fleshing out the relationships of various people at court. Unfortunately, this only works about 3/4 of the time, and then there's that 1/4 that's a lot of little things that eats away little by little at the verisimilitude and the enjoyment of the episode, and then 1 or 2 things per episode which are just seem really stupid and poorly thought out. Usually, it's something about the world feeling consistent and real. I don't want to hear anybody telling me that it doesn't have to make sense because it's fantasy. If that's what you're going to say, just don't bother, okay? I've heard this so many times. This is a world built around political machinations. So when things completely break the logic of the world that's set up, that really does mess with the ability to engage with the story. Not to mention understanding the character motivations and the choices that are available to the characters. We can start by looking at the episode with the tourney. The tourney is shown parallel to the scene of Emma's childbirth. Now, I know why this was done. The writers are very clear about how they like using violence for dramatic and thematic effect. In this scene, or set of scenes I suppose, they're trying to show that both men and women in this medieval world have great dangers and suffering to face. Men in battle, and women in the bearing, birthing, and raising of children. As a fight breaks out on the tourney with huge amounts of violence and killing, Emma is in great pain struggling to birth her child, and eventually they decide that in order to save the child heir, they'll have to do a cesarean, which will kill Emma, and we see this violent procedure enacted parallel with Daemon and Sir Criston's battle. It's very dramatic, and it does do a good job at portraying the theme visually. However, it kinda doesn't make much sense in a world like this. From Daemon going against what I can only assume are the rules and tripping the Hightower's son's horse, to the axes in the heads of major lords, everyone is way too casual about this whole thing. A tourney is not a gladiatorial arena. These are wealthy, high-powered lords who are engaged in games for favor and glory in front of the highest houses. It's basically a networking event. The kind of violence on display here should be highly contentious and rare. When it happens, it should be a big deal and create turmoil between the houses. But here, Daemon does something that could have killed a Hightower, is presented like it's meant to be dangerous, and against the convention at least, if not the rules, then goes up to another Hightower for a favor, and they'll just treat it like it's fun and casual. I mean, is this meant to inform Otto's later dislike of Daemon? It might be, but based on the lack of negative reception from pretty much anyone now, it's kinda hard to say. This is an issue they repeat as well, with episode 4 starting with a bloody fight between a Blackwood and Bracken, which nobody even seems to care about stopping. I mean, look, it was pretty funny. And of course, there is a big moment in episode 5 where Criston Cole murders Sir Joffrey Lonmouth and strikes Lord Laenor at a pre-wedding feast. Not a single person in the entire hall besides Laenor seems to care about this at all. The fact that he brutally murdered a lord and knight. And after he does this, not only does nobody try to intervene and stop the action, but nobody even tries to pursue him or hold him as he walks out of the hall. And he manages to get all the way to the Godswood before Alicent seems to be able to wander out to find him on her own. They also do the time jump right after this, which means we'll never get any explanation for how the fight started, why nobody did anything to stop it, or how the Queen convinced everyone at court that not only should his life be spared, but he should retain his position in the Kingsguard. I'm pretty sure murdering a lord breaks their oaths. I'm not saying we need to know everything, but this feels like a pretty big detail that could lead to some interesting character development between Alicent, Criston, Laenor, and Rhaenyra. In the book, as I've been told, it's much less clear that the death was intentional in the first place, which would have resolved the issue, but they made sure it was super clear that it was murder. This is the writers writing themselves into corners, even when the original material wouldn't have done so. This would also fix up how weird it seems for Harwin to be dismissed for a much more minor incident when Cole is free to continue his post with no explanation. I think it's a big problem for these writers. They feel like they need to have a massive shock moment every episode, but they fail to adequately set it up and pay it off because that's not their priority. In a compelling world, actions have consequences which align with what we know about the world and characters, and sometimes that just seems to go by the wayside in this show. Okay, I've gone on a lot about my problems with the show, but there's still a lot I like about it. It's still miles above Game of Thrones Season 7 and 8, even 5 and 6, and it's better than most TV fantasy in general. The political machinations are genuinely interesting and complex, and the characters are developed quite well in really a very short amount of time for most of them. One of the most interesting to me is Daemon, who, while a horrible person, is not a cartoon villain. The show is doing a great job of setting up his disdain for lords and political games, his desire for both power and independence, his middle child syndrome, and his deep affection to his niece, which in true Targaryen form heads in a rather incesty direction, and I know it's going to get worse. In episode 5, we see how he schemes to better and wed her rather than to seek to destroy her for power, rule alongside her when she's queen. But for a cruel and violent man, his genuine love of his niece stops him from going all the way with it. Likewise, he seems to have a genuine love for Laena after the 10-year time jump, and treats her and her children with gentle kindness. I really love the complexity of his character, and that doesn't in any way mean that he's not a contemptible person. Like, I'm not going to forget him murdering his first wife. It's just nice to see that they've given him layers. My favourite character of all, though, is definitely Viserys. In a show where one of the weaknesses is that many characters are difficult to root for, it's impossible for me to not root for this guy, even knowing his life and rule are doomed to end in tragedy. Viserys is really just an ordinary, kind man who is faced with impossible choices on the daily and struggles to find the right path to keep the peace and ensure the best for his family and his kingdom. He's pretty much the epitome of the phrase, "heavy is the head that wears the crown," as represented in the show by his body literally rotting from his cuts from the Iron Throne that seem to get infected and never heal, slowly withering his body away and making him decrepit. I've seen debates over whether Viserys is a good or a bad king. I think he's somewhere in the middle. He definitely leans towards trying to make everyone happy, but there are numerous times throughout the show where he has the guts to lay down the law and make hard decisions, like when he banishes Daemon twice, forcing Rhaenyra to choose a husband, naming Rhaenyra as his heir over Daemon in order to protect the realm from him, and then sticking to it over all the years, so on and so on. He is not completely gutless by any means. The Hunt episode is one of my favourites, and it shows his biggest weakness, when he falters far too long in killing the stag, and missing the heart on the first blow. Viserys is kind, but sometimes as a king kindness can be a weakness, and it may well lead him to holding off too long and making the hard decisions, drawing out pain for longer than necessary, knowing full well that eventually someone will have to be put out of their misery for the struggle to end. And from what I know about the dance, if he makes a decision at all, it may come way too late. It's unfortunate then that he won't last long. Already this show's wise, honourable Ned Stark type character, Lionel Strong, has passed from the show, and Viserys will surely be gone in an episode or two. So who do I root for then? Rhaenyra and Alicent have a very interesting dynamic, friends twisted by the machinations of their elders and by fears over the line of succession into becoming opposing schemers, but individually, I kind of find neither of them terribly likeable. So who will I root for once Viserys is gone? One of my issues with episode 6 was how little time we got to spend with the grown Laena and Harwin Strong. This seems to be an issue in general, rushing the build-up to the Dance of Dragons so it can fit neatly into 10 episodes, meaning some character deaths lack the proper impact they deserve because we simply don't know the characters well enough. How much better would it have been if we'd waited until the end of episode 7 to kill them off, and gotten a bit of time to explore the relationship between Rhaenyra and Harwin, and Daemon and Laena? I actually really liked both of their characters. Laena's dynamic with Daemon in particular seemed very interesting, with her feeling that he is giving up on his true desires in order for simplicity and comfort, and to have her go out with this barely established is just so underwhelming. It doesn't help that the scene just looks really poorly cut, like something was removed in the editing booth. Laena is surrounded by nurses, but we cut away for a few seconds from her starting to lift herself up, and as soon as we cut back, she's apparently left and is halfway across the beach to a dragon before Daemon or any nurse has a chance to follow her. Also, I know I'm not an expert in pregnancy, but it feels kinda weird how well she is able to walk while in the middle of a ridiculously difficult labor. I don't know, I just don't buy it. It's these weirdly poorly written and shot moments which stand out and are such a shame because so much of the show is great. For a similar comparison, I love the scene at the beginning of the episode, showing Rhaenyra's labor in excruciating brutality, only for Alicent to immediately ask to see the baby, presumably to show Viserys it's another bastard, and to power play over Rhaenyra. And to have Rhaenyra brutally struggle to defy her petty power play by insisting on carrying the baby herself while she is still experiencing the afterbirth, struggling greatly through 2 long one-shots to travel up the impressive castle set to her chambers, that's just great stuff. It's not only amazing visual filmmaking across all departments, but it's great characterization and storytelling as well. It immediately establishes the updated relationships between Rhaenyra, Alicent, and Laenor, as well as her new role as a mother that has dissolved much of the vigor and rebellious dreams of her youth. So that's House of the Dragon so far. Great show in many ways, but with an unfortunate glut of things that really weigh it down quite a lot. Some of it's a natural result of trying to tell a story stretching over a long period of time in very few episodes, a feat admittedly done well very rarely, but also some simply baffling and poorly thought out writing and editing decisions that really let the world building, character, and narrative down. If the writers can just put a bit more care into it and iron out these issues, this story has the potential to be as good as peak Game of Thrones, but so far, it's just not there yet. Now, before I end this video, I just have one thing to say to George R.R. Martin, the creator of this amazing world that we're seeing before us. Finish the books.
I'm working. I'm very busy. What deadline? No, I'm not. You know what? After giving it some thought, I don't owe you any book. No book. That first book made a fortune for you. And I don't owe you anything. In fact, I'm not going to give you the next book. That's it. Don't call here anymore. No more damn books. No more books.